and we'll start it with the Pledge of Allegiance led by Joe. So stand for the pledge. Got the flag here. We're all set.
Hey, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, well, I want to thank everybody for making the time and the effort to join us on this occasion to listen to the consultants, to see what's going on a big picture for what our future will look like and should look like based on the harbor management plan moving forward. So do we need to do a roll call, or is Telesco going to do that based on the people's names as they show up on the video?
I can do it. If that's what you would like, Mr. Romano.
Yes, please do. This way it'll be duly noted who attended the meeting. Thank you.
Okay, John Romano.
Here. No, you don't have to do a roll call. If you could see their names.
Oh, okay.
Just write them down, and as they enter the meeting, just include them in the overall
Okay.
picture of the meeting. And any guests that will be attending, because I know several people may. Do we need to do introductions other than as we talk in groups? Our three commissions know each other because we're intimately involved.
It would probably be good, very good to anybody who's not on the commissions. If they identified what group they were with, that would be helpful.
For your purposes. So
Yes.
if there are any guests and people other than the commission people present, would you please make your presence known and read your name into the record, please?
Guess we can have the consulting team introduce themselves.
Hi, Tim Love from UTEAL, president and principal of UTEAL, where I'm from the consulting team.
And I'm Zoe Mueller. I'm the project manager for this effort, also with UTEAL. I'm a planner by training.
Is there anyone else?
Bill Mooney,
Norwalk Health Department.
Michelle from Planning and Zoning.
Okay, anyone else?
Laura Kenny from Planning and Zoning.
And
Okay.
Steve Kleppen, Planning and Zoning.
Yeah, all of your names are showing up on the screen. I was just looking for other people other than city agencies or different commission members at this point. Because if we had to go through the whole list, it may take most of our time. At this point, I think first on the agenda, we're going to deal with speaking with the consultants and have them give us a review of the scope of work and what kind of information they're looking to gather and whom they have spoken to as stakeholders during this process. But prior to, I just want to make another comment. We've had so many studies going on in Norwalk. Sometimes a lot of people get confused about which study is for where and what and when and how. I think, if I'm not mistaken, UTEAL, you just completed several months ago another study. Is that correct? And that has to do with the industrial properties, which is not part of this study.
That's correct. So that's sort of the industrial zone study that you're referring to. We just wrapped up. It is sort of the precursor to this waterfront study. So you can kind of see this as an extension of the industrial zone study that is specific to the waterfront.
Yeah, but see, that's where some of the confusion comes in. And I understand we need to deal with these each individually.
Yeah,
I know
yeah, John, if I can interrupt, what is the overlap of what we're dealing with here between the marine commercial zone and your industrial zone. I think that would be important for us to find out. Because there is
Yeah, it might be,
overlap.
it might be
There's an
helpful.
overlap because,
Yeah.
because we have a CAM, coastal management area, which deals with 1,000 feet, from the harbor. And so I'm sure there's going to be a lot of overlap that you're going to be discussing. What is that overlap?
Yeah, I think it'd be best if Steve from the city maybe
Well,
set the broader
let me just
context.
set the tone first, okay? Because I'm running this meeting at this point. And I was gonna bring up that point, John, that we have a TOD that was done. And it was a great plan. And we sat down and we have in the body of that plan, the acceptance of the harbor management plan in the TOD. And then we have the industrial plan, which actually we never even knew anything about it until it just came to light, because now it's public. And I think the Common Council is going to deal with it, or the committee will, on Thursday night. And it was in the paper the other day. That was our first awareness of what was going on with that. And then we have this plan. Now, in that first plan that you finished with, in there it says that, I think it was under bullet point 4, that now you're going to continue on and deal with the waterfront. But that dealing with the waterfront overlaps, and that's what John was getting to what this plan is doing. So, and you say this is a continuation of that. So is this the waterfront component of that plan, or is there going to be another waterfront component as an adjunct to that plan that was finished already? Because it seems to us, and that's where the confusion comes in, if you're looking to deal with stakeholders and the use of the land along the water, whether it's industrial or not, anything does become part of our purview within 1,000 feet of the water, as John said, from a CAM perspective. And then it's water use and how they're doing it, and drainage and other issues, which I won't get into for this moment. So that's where, if you can clear up that confusion, because it seems like because the TOD touches on it in one portion of it, then your industrial study, and then your industrial study stops and said it's going to go on to do the coastline and the industrial water spots. So I'm confused, because if that plan is going to continue as that plan, and this is a separate plan, what's the interaction between the two?
It was the POCD, John.
Can I kind of cut this off and clear it up, and maybe we can move on with the evening? I think that would be helpful.
Yeah.
So initially we wanted to look at the waterfront as part of the industrial zones plan. In conversations with the consultant kind of early on, we figured, based on the complexity and the issues surrounding the waterfront, that it was, within that scope, we weren't going to be able to do it justice. So we took that component out of the study. We went back to the city and moved some funds around that I had already in my department, transferred those internally, and then we added the additional scope to look at the waterfront in depth, which is where we're at now. So we did ask you guys to participate in this. We're kind of at that stage now where we're talking to stakeholders. We want to hear from you. And I think it's probably the easiest thing to do would be to have UTL go through their presentation, which is actually really short, which will be good for everybody, just to kind of say, here's where we're at and what we're thinking, and then get input from you guys.
Yeah, that's exactly where we are on the agenda. So turn the meeting over to you two.
Okay, and I want to say, John, that I think your summary of the interconnection of the parts was very accurate, actually, which is that the focus of our study is landside land use regulations and zoning, which has to be married up with the harbor plan so that there's a consistency between the land use regulations and the plan that you and your group have been doing. So I think that we're here to supplement and complement the work that this commission's been doing to make sure that the zoning is in sync with the vision for the water sheet itself. Does that help as a kind of framing comment?
Yeah, no, that's fine. And again, we're pro-development too.
Yeah, and again, we don't, I think the other misconception is that the point of this plan is to change existing allowable uses or even densities. It's to assess the existing conditions and work with you and other stakeholders to decide the best path forward. There was some misconception that this was a pro redevelopment plan, but we have no agenda at this point. This is actually our first meeting of the entire project.
Okay, cool. So continue, please.
So I'll just kind of walk us through a couple of slides to get you guys oriented, and then we can sort of jump in with any questions and return to any slides that you guys, need some more clarity on. So we've already kind of done half of the intro. There's 2 team members that are not here with us for this presentation, but you've heard from Tim and myself. And then Will is also supporting us on this project, as well as Kevin Hively, who's an economic development analyst and consultant. All 4 of us have worked on an array of waterfront plans, some of which are focused specifically on industrial waterfronts and some of which are more sort of broad in their scope and purpose. So we come to this with a lot of experience, sort of in the New England context in particular, looking at waterfronts and the mix of uses along waterfronts. To give you a feel for the sort of the range of that, you can see here we touched Gloucester, Lynn, Boston, New Bedford, Salem, Chelsea, and then again, sort of returning to Boston for a couple of additional more specific studies, as well as Hyannis, New Haven, Hull, Revere, Malden. So you can see this is kind of a real, point of pride for our firm. We do a lot of work in this area, and we're excited to sort of, get to know your waterfront and work with you to shape it. In terms of your question about, there is a lot of activity in Norwalk, there's a lot of planning activity. And so we wanted to help, do what we can to try and clarify how all those things, how all those puzzle pieces fit together. So the first thing is the Norwalk Industrial Zone study, which we, were talking about earlier. That was focused eventually on non-waterfront industrial land use recommendations. It was released to public comment very recently. There's also the ongoing Zone Norwalk effort, which is the comprehensive citywide rezoning that will incorporate recommendations that emerge from these more specific land use studies. So both the industrial zone study and the waterfront study. And then there's the East Norwalk TOD plan, the Sono TOD plan, and the transportation master plan. So we understand that there's a lot going on. And so we want to try and help explain kind of how this fits into all of that. So brief overview of the industrial zones study. The sort of the big picture intent was to take stock of the 14 different districts in the city of Norwalk that allowed some kind of industrial use, and understand, what mix of industrial uses and non-industrial uses was appropriate in different parts of the city, and try and just clarify it and make it more simple and intuitive for people to understand, as well as preparing Norwalk to receive more modern industrial development, which had different, dimensional needs, different sort of land use adjacencies, different, development, standards in terms of the visual appearance and the sort of the quality of the public realm. So just thinking a little bit about how to take the industrial zones in Norwalk into the 21st century and make sure that the land use recommendations supported that. So where we landed was these sort of 4 simplified land use classifications that can be incorporated into the sort of the specific zoning code. And the big picture idea here is to just distinguish between the high impact or sort of high intensity industrial uses, which do need some degree of separation, some degree of buffering, versus the more kind of active, contributions to a mixed use environment, like, say a brewery or an artist's workshop or things like that, that are also industrial in character, but have a different sort of relationship to the neighborhoods and districts around them. So this is the framework that we're looking to sort of bring to the waterfront context and sort of match up with the specific circumstances of the water and sort of the uses along the waterfront. So that's the sort of intention: simplify it, make it sort of ready for what's coming to Norwalk, the sort of opportunities to bring economic development and sort of a strong land use framework for future development. In terms of our study area for this, this effort currently for the waterfront land use study, this is sort of the area that we are going to be focusing on. You can see it has a broad mix of different types of land uses, everything from sort of mixed use to sort of CBD, industrial number one, which is the higher impact or higher intensity industrial uses, municipal infrastructure, parks, and the commercial marinas. So this is we understand this is a complex study area with a lot of different different stakeholders, different land uses. We also understand there's the navigational channels that shape what uses can happen in different parts of the harbor, as well as the flood zone, which of course impacts operations and sort of investment patterns for the different businesses and land along the water.
It's worth saying, Zoe, if you go back to that slide, that as you can see, I mean, everybody knows on this call, but the mix of land uses around the waterfront of Norwalk is actually quite remarkable. It has almost everything abutting it, and that in a way is the challenge, but the interest of this plan, which is how do we sort this out and think about it in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. And we had the pleasure of visiting Norwalk earlier this year. Let's see if I can get this to play here. I'm going to mute it because you don't need the sound part. But, this is a dynamic waterfront. There's a lot going on here. There's already a mix of, institutional and tourism uses, water dependent industrial uses, recreation, residential, parks and open space, commercial marinas. So this is part of the complexity that we want to work with you to understand and sort of, incorporate into our land use recommendations. So in terms of the purpose of the plan, sort of in more sort of explicit terms, the explicit purpose of this plan is as an extension of the industrial zone study, like we talked about, to enable a more detailed study of the complexities that impact land use on the waterfront. We also want to develop, stepping back a bit, develop a balanced vision, working with a lot of different stakeholders that has broad support so that we can move towards any land use changes that are needed with a broad base of support from the community and from stakeholders like yourself. The intention is for this to guide policy change. So principally looking at the rezoning effort, but if in the process we come up with together anything that we think makes sense to incorporate into an updated harbor management plan, we'd like to sort of incorporate that into our recommendation so that you have a platform to move forward with for that effort. Again, we don't come in with an agenda. We don't have any changes that we've already, planned out, but we want to work with you to understand if you think there are any that need to happen. And then there's sort of more programmatic and physical components of the study. So looking at potential economic development strategies and initiatives, so things that the city might pursue in terms of its own sort of staff and programs to attract the kind of development that we find out makes sense for the waterfront, as well as any capital projects and sort of dedicated funding that can help to make specific changes or improvements to infrastructure or park spaces or sort of anything that's going to have a positive impact for the waterfront land and sort of help to bring about some of the bigger picture land use goals that are identified throughout the process. We also wanted to address, specifically the environmental components of the plan. This isn't the primary focus of the plan, but it's an important element. So, our primary focus is, land use. But of course, land use has environmental implications. And so we will be looking to understand any high risk or sensitive areas, any sort of dredging, need, the risk or reward associated with that. Any capital projects that might improve water quality. And then finally, all of that basically filters it for us in terms of our work product and what we're collaborating with the city on is, what of all of that makes sense to incorporate into zoning standards, so requirements for development. So that would be things like, it could be, runoff standards, it could be things like landscape buffers or retention and treatment metrics. There's a lot of different directions that this can go in, but in terms of our perspective on it, what we're looking to identify are capital projects, programs, and zoning standards that would incorporate environmental goals into policy and programs that can move forward. To give you a little bit more of a sort of fine-grained understanding of where our sort of focus will be, we will be kind of within this black dotted boundary. That is our focus for this land use study. But as I'm sure anybody who's sort of spent some time in this area knows, like these things aren't, you can't just draw a line and ignore what's on the other side. So we will be looking for kind of the context around our study area to understand the relationships between any potential changes that we're exploring on the waterfront properties, and look at what the impact might be or what the relationship might be with properties that are across the street from it, properties that are, share a property line with them, so that we can make sure that we're not creating any new problems through any changes that, are proposed through this process. And of course, the parks remain parks. We have no intention of changing that. We are merely including them in the study so that we can understand their relationship to the land uses around them and see if we can make some small tweaks to help support them going forward. In terms of the existing zoning, this is sort of the different districts that are included in our study area. And moving forward, based on the industrial the Norwalk Industrial Zone study that was just completed, you'll see we've left sort of the waterfront area blank. We don't have any recommendations for it at this time, but you can see the sort of relationships that we imagine around it, where you might see residential in the yellow, the various industrial districts going from purple through to sort of the light pink, and then neighborhood business is sort of mixed in there as well. We also are showing the overlay for the East Norwalk Village zone as well. And then finally, I just wanted to give you an overview of our timeline, and then this is it for our presentation, and we can open up for any questions. We launched in August when we went to visit the sort of the Norwalk waterfront and talk with the city, talk with a couple of stakeholders, and that was sort of our, ground truthing, just getting to know the area, making sure that we understood some of the relationships physically and experientially. We're now kind of in our due diligence period where we're doing a lot of reading. We're continuing to have stakeholder interviews and meetings like this one, just to get to understand some of the key issues that people think are facing the waterfront. And then we'll kind of move from the existing conditions into a phase where we're looking at scenarios. So exploring a couple of different alternatives for directions for land use along the waterfront. And we'll get feedback from you and from the public on those different alternatives. And then once there's sort of a preferred alternative or a preferred mixture of sort of the scenarios that we've developed, we'll start moving forward with that preferred mixture and begin to refine the details of it, develop specific recommendations about how to move forward with it. So there's sort of, you can think of it in terms of 3 phases. We're in the sort of documentation, document review and existing conditions analysis phase right now. It's really a listening and learning phase for us. The following phase will be sort of exploratory. That's when we're developing the scenarios, we're getting feedback on the scenarios. And then the final phase is documentation of the specific recommendations associated with a preferred scenario. So that's it for us. You already have contact info for Steve, Laura, and Michelle. But at this time, I welcome any questions. We can jump back to any slides that you want to review in greater detail or talk through. Yeah, floor is back to you.
All right, Michelle, if you can make me co-host, as we have our Harbor Commission presentation.
Okay, what we're gonna do is we're gonna move on to the harbor presentation, like John said, to give you guys an awareness of our perspective and what the plan does say and what we hold to be dear and near.
Perfect.
As the
Look forward to it.
stakeholders or wardens and looking out for the public interest, this is our operating Bible, so to speak. And then we'll open it up to questions back and forth. All right,
Perfect.
John and Jeff, you want to,
John, are you able to load up?
Yeah, we're all set, Michelle.
Should go back to the first slide, John. If you don't mind, we'll talk for a little bit. It's interesting to hear your presentation because in some ways we're revisiting history because a number of us have been involved with waterfront planning in Norwalk since the 1980s when the city's municipal coastal program was approved by the state of Connecticut in 1988. And then in 1990, the harbor management plan was adopted by the city council, common council. So I think one thing that we have to keep in mind is the role of coastal management here, because you haven't mentioned in your reports the Connecticut Coastal Management Act, which affects much of the land use planning that we're involved with here. And in fact, the Coastal Management Act is implemented in large part through municipal planning and zoning authorities. And that's the basis of Norwalk's municipal coastal program, which consists of the plan of conservation and development. Back in the 80s, it was the master plan and the zoning regulations that serve to implement the state's coastal management policies. So we have a presentation that we've developed over time. We first given this a number of times to state agencies and also to stakeholders. But and we won't talk we can share all this with you, but so we won't talk at length. But I think it might be helpful for you to just go through these, for us to go through these slides. We refer to Norwalk Harbor as the jewel of Long Island Sound. That was a term that was brought up by one of our former chairs, Jack Callahan, and that's what's guided the commission for all the years since it's been established since 1986, I believe.
And it seemed to stick, the name.
Yeah, with pursuing the public interest in guiding the use and conservation of Norwalk Harbor. John, you want to go?
Yeah.
We know where we're located, but again, it's a coastal city, and we can't lose sight of the Coastal Management Act of the state of Connecticut. And I don't know that you have yet, but at some point you should reach out to the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection because they administer the Coastal Management Act, and they were the approving body of Norwalk's municipal coastal program in the late 1980s. And if you eliminate that marine commercial zoning district, that of course has a significant impact on the municipal coastal program. That's when the city's coastal program was approved by the state, when that zoning regulation was applied to the Water Street area. Now, in effect, we're revisiting history. So I think it's important that we understand that if we're going to be successful, John. Yeah. The harbor boundaries, you're familiar with them. It's an extensive harbor. It's identified in the city code and the town charter. It actually includes the 5 Mile River Harbor, but not for the purpose of the harbor management plan. The 5 Mile River Harbor is outside of your study area anyway. But it's the area including the Norwalk Islands and up to the head of navigation at Wall Street. It includes a good bit of your study area. Right. What we call the upper harbor, we'll get into that. We divided it into different sections for the purposes of the policies of the harbor management plan. And also talking about environmental quality in Norwalk and in the harbor, we can't lose sight of the Norwalk River watershed. There's 7 towns, areas drain and all eventually ends up in the harbor. And the Harbor Commission was instrumental in establishing the Norwalk River Watershed Initiative years ago. And this was one of the first watershed action plans in Connecticut. And the impetus for it in large part was because of the value of Norwalk's shellfish resources and the understanding that the runoff pollution from throughout the watershed can adversely affect the shellfish resources in Norwalk Harbor. So we can't lose with respect to environmental initiatives. The watershed is an important part. And as I'm sure you've looked at in your research, the history of shoreline changes. And that 1934 aerial survey, I'm sure you know, is fascinating to look at the history of that and what, how that originated and what we can learn from that. But if you look at the comparison of 34 to 2018, you see how the obvious changes in coastal resources have taken place. And the area that's now Veterans Park, it was the Seaview Avenue dump. And as a result of lawsuits by the oyster industry back in the late 1920s, that led to the building of the Norwalk wastewater treatment plant. And now that's Veterans Park. You can also see how the Cove Marina area, another probably the most prominent water dependent use on the shoreline, didn't exist in 1934. Neither did the Manresa Island power plant or I-95. And where Oyster Shell Park is now, that was a dump as well. So the history of shoreline changes in terms of environmental impacts is significant, but also in terms of changing in water dependent uses, which is very important. And if you look at your Upper Harbor, we'll talk about this later. When we prepared the harbor management plan in 1990, there were 5 waterfront terminals involved with maritime commerce and products. There's now 1. So clearly the water dependent component is changing. Yeah, John.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned the federal navigation channels. The harbor management plan designates the Harbor Commission as the authority or the responsible city agency working with the Corps of Engineers to maintain the channels. And we did that. It was what we called an Augean task, beginning in 1997 and ending in 2014 to do a comprehensive dredging of the navigation channels. And also we spent significant time twice modifying the boundaries of the federal navigation project through acts of Congress, which I won't go into the details of how that was done, but that was done according to a specific process that was set up at the time by Congressman Shays and Senator Lieberman that was meant to ensure that modifications to the channel were done in the public interest, not to help out individuals or specific groups. So yes, the navigation project is a significant aspect of Norwalk Harbor. The commission is responsible for working with the Corps to maintain the navigation project. John, and going through these slides very quickly, the historic nature of the waterfront and the extent to which maritime history is important in Norwalk, steamships and lumber schooners and the oyster industry, it's all part of the maritime heritage of the city. And it's a policy of the plan not to lose sight of that and to build on that to the extent that we can. We know now, of course, now Norwalk, the commercial uses have changed, but it remains a center of recreational boating. And we're not just talking about marinas, we're talking about water dependent uses that have facilities to repair and store and maintain recreational boating. And I think if you look at what's happened in Stamford recently, which is maybe the trend. We'll hold off on that, but that's the essential issue that we were dealing with back in the 1980s and that we're still dealing with now. It's that the land is very valuable, and use of that land for boat storage or repair is not, from the property owner's perspective, the most desirable use. John, go on. And we've talked about commercial shellfishing, the extent to which the majority of the harvest in the state of Connecticut comes from the Norwalk area. The shellfish industry was established in Norwalk, and it's still the center of the state's. And there are members of the Shellfish Commission that are on this meeting tonight that can impress that upon you as well. Waterborne commerce still exists, but as I mentioned, not to the extent that it did with the tank farms up in the Upper Harbor. The asphalt plant that isn't functioning anymore. There's one commercial entity that takes in barge shipments of aggregates. There were 5 entities in 1990 that brought in barge shipments of aggregates. But was also part of the National Marine Highway system with the recent business to move farm products to restaurants back and forth.
Long Island Sound.
Yeah. The boating center is a principal right across from the Water Street Marine Commercial area, named after another prominent chair of the Harbor Commission, who devoted much of his time to the public interest in Norwalk Harbor. And the Harbor Commission is not responsible for managing this facility, but has an important role in its operation. The visitors docks was the idea of the Harbor Commission many years ago. And in 2015 and then 2019, the commission prepared the grant applications for receiving over $1 million from the state of Connecticut to dredge this area and also to redo the docks. So this is an important point of this is the principal public boating facility on the harbor.
A gateway to the Army, from the Army Corps of Engineers.
Oh, and it's also the public landing that's required as a condition of the Federal Navigation Project going back to the early 1900s, John.
Yeah.
Numerous points of public access. You mentioned that in some of your materials. The large waterfront parks at Veterans Park and Calf Pasture Beach, but also the street ends that are important, and the smaller areas, and the Heritage Park that includes the Oyster Shell Park going up the river. I'm sorry to be talking so much. If you interrupt me if you want me to stop. The coastal resources is another major part of this. Our goal, and the goal of the national goal of coastal management, is beneficial use of the coast and protection and enhancement of coastal resources. And Norwalk's coastal resources are unsurpassed. The islands are unique. There's substantial tidal wetlands. And that small image in the bottom is the intertidal areas that support the most valuable shellfish resources in Connecticut.
Dangerous species.
Yeah, John, tourism and education, you understand the importance of that too. And that was one of the reasons behind the Harbor Commission's idea of the visitors dock in the first place, that people could come to Norwalk, walk across the street and go to the Maritime Aquarium and also the South Norwalk Historic District. And that's still the goal of that project. And I just mentioned coastal management briefly. Well, maybe not briefly, because we talk about it all the time, but it's very important. So the image on the right shows the coastal boundary. So all the projects within that coastal boundary require coastal site plan review by the planning and zoning authorities to determine the compliance with the state's coastal management policies. And that municipal coastal program, as I mentioned, is an important element of everything that we do. This is related to the harbor management work, because these projects that require the coastal site plan review are referred to the Harbor Commission for review and comment in terms of their impacts on the harbor area. John, the next. And the harbor management plan is separate from the POCD. Remember, they're separate documents. They interact on the waterfront. Norwalk's plan was one of the first in the state of Connecticut, adopted, approved by the state, and then adopted by the Common Council in 1990.
Well, we started before that.
It's one of 26 plans in the state. Notice we put Norwalk in like bigger letters to stand out its importance here. But I'm joking. But the municipalities preparing harbor management plans, they're all doing it for one common purpose, which was to increase municipal authority relative to state and federal authority and increase home rule. That's the purpose of the main purpose of the harbor management plans, John.
Yeah.
And the authority for doing this comes from the 1984 statute and also from the 1984 Norwalk Code. And forgive me again, tell me to stop talking, but this picture here in the East Norwalk Basin, that's the issue that started there was the reason the Norwalk Harbor Management Plan was started, but it's also the reason for the harbor management program, the basis of it in Connecticut. And what happened here was, it's very interesting history. In 1980, the Corps of Engineers contractor came to dredge this part of Norwalk Harbor and found that the property owners on the east side had built docks that all went out into the federal channel. And to that point, the Corps had not done a good job of enforcing its policies for avoiding encroachments into the federal navigation projects. again, this is very interesting. A friend of mine worked for the Corps of Engineers as an attorney, and his job was to figure out how to deal with these issues. So in 1980, for the first time, the Corps took action against the property owners with the U.S. attorney, told them to remove the structures or they were subject to significant fines. A fellow from the Corps of Engineers suggested at that time that if there was a local commission or entity responsible for such matters, perhaps these things could be headed off. And that's what led to one of the state legislatures working with others to introduce the Connecticut Harbor Management Act, authorizing municipalities to have harbor management plans. And of course, the entities along the East Norwalk shoreline were supportive of that at the time, because hoping that the Harbor Commission could help them solve their problems, which we did through an amendment or a reconfiguration of the federal channel and the federal anchorage basin there to eliminate those encroachments and allow for after the fact approvals with certain conditions. So I'm sorry but that's the origin of the harbor management program in Connecticut as well as in Norwalk, John. And you mentioned that the goals that you talked about in your preliminary remarks are essentially the same goals that we have in the harbor management plan. All right, so you're in a way you're revisiting what the commission is responsible for. And the plan that we put together, that the commission has put together, is a policy document. It's not a guide to waterfront development, or it's a policy document that the commission applies on a case-by-case basis when matters, in reviewing applications and with other matters. So it doesn't have an answer to every problem that may arise. It provides a policy framework for dealing with issues that do come up. But and responsibilities for implementation, it's like any plan. The commission has the main responsibility is the authority for implementing it, but other city agencies are involved, and the state of Connecticut harbor master is, and of course the council and the mayor sets guidance and direction and provides leadership, and the common council approves or adopts ordinances and any changes to the plan. And then the state and the federal agencies. John, go back. The benefits of the plan, the principal benefit that we've always seen is the increase in home rule relative to the state and federal governments with respect to matters concerning the harbor. That's the legislative intent of the Harbor Management Act, and that's what we've always pursued. Setting the long range vision, increasing coordination, giving people an opportunity to come and speak about their interests, and providing, as you mentioned, capital projects. That's what we already do, because the grants that I mentioned for the $1 million+ for the boating center, based on the policies of the plan, that's what that area should be for. John, go on.
Yeah.
These are the ongoing programs that the commission implements and is responsible for. You can read them as well as I can. Application review, managing shellfish resources in coordination with the Shellfish Commission. The commission has the principal responsibilities. Water quality is of course a major program that we pursue. Harbor safety, dredging, with commission's responsible for that, of plans and recommendations, and administering moorings. John, if you just go through. Application review. The two types of applications are the land use applications that are submitted to P&Z that within the coastal site plan applications, as well as applications or proposals for plans and regulations affecting the waterfront. That's specified in the general statutes. So the revision of the POCD, that was subject to review by the Harbor Commission, just as revisions to the waterfront zoning regulations will be, and as specific development plans are. And then the other type of review is the applications for state and federal permits that the commission looks at. The shellfish management, the harbor management plan has a number of policies to protect and enhance shellfish resources, and the Shellfish Commission has the principal responsibility, but we work with them to advance those policies, and we have a number of programs that we work on in conjunction with the Shellfish Commission, John. Now, Mr. Schneerlein is here, but the water quality committee, the mayor's water quality committee goes back to 1990. And that was a committee formed to make recommendations and identify problems and work towards improving water quality in the harbor. The harbor management plan has a number of policies that we apply when we review development proposals. And much attention is given to stormwater management, as you can well imagine. And we've done special studies that I think that we're all very proud of that have, and I can mention those a little later. Go on, John. Public safety, the harbor master has important responsibilities, but we got to mention, of course, the good job of the police department of Norwalk and the fire department. The marine units of both of those departments that do a wonderful job. Dredging, we talked enough about that. I mentioned that as an Augean task when we spent over 10 years working with the Corps of Engineers and seeking funding. There was a headline in the Norwalk newspaper that described the dredging process as a relay race in the twilight zone, but we were able to still accomplish it. But it's interesting now because the funding sources are different. When these most recent project, which was completed in 2014, the funds came from earmark funds from Congress. That process, as you know, doesn't exist anymore. And Norwalk cannot expect to receive, and the Corps of Engineers has told us this, money through the Corps' budget because Norwalk doesn't have the commercial activity that Boston Harbor and Baltimore do. So that the future funding, as we're looking at it now, and unless something major changes with the federal government, the future major funding for the dredging of the navigation project would come from the state of Connecticut. And in 2011, the state of Connecticut established a program specifically to provide state bonded funds for the maintenance of federal projects that couldn't expect to receive the federal funds from Congress. But the dredging is the responsibility of the Harbor Commission. John, plans and recommendations. We've worked on a number of studies and documents. Again, this document that you see on the screen was the coastal vision that we prepared as part of the POCD process along with recommendations for inclusion in the POCD. And if you remember at that time, the POCD consultant proposed eliminating the marine commercial planning district. And we objected to that. That we wanted to keep that as the marine commercial district, but we'll get to that in a bit. And mooring administration, well, the hundreds of moorings that are in Norwalk Harbor, the mooring permit fees go into a dedicated account that can only be used for purposes of improving the harbor for the public and for necessary expenses of the Harbor Commission and the Harbor Master. John. So getting towards the end now, the priorities that we have. And then I don't want to say that these are, but number one is probably the number one priority, which is to review the Walk Bridge project by the Department of Transportation in an effort to avoid, reduce, otherwise mitigate the adverse impact of that project. Also to review and avoid adverse impact of the Eversource transmission cable project. Continue the many water quality initiatives. We have statewide initiatives that we're pursuing too with the legislature to improve and clarify harbor management authorities. And then what we've added is number 5, to interact with planning and zoning and your group to guide this study to its most beneficial outcome.
Yeah.
So the Walk Bridge project, without going, you're familiar with this. The bridge was built in 1896. It's to be replaced now, and it could take 5 years to do, and it's a somewhat complex project. There is its location, and the DOT, they have a difficult job in doing this, but their job is different than the commission's job. Our job is to, and the DOT knows that, and they've worked with the commission to avoid impacts on water quality, navigation, public access.
Yeah.
And this is a good example of the harbor management plan and what this plan does. It doesn't say how that bridge was to be built. It has policies to protect water quality and maintain navigation and public safety. that we apply when we're reviewing the DOT's plans. A major effort that when we're working with a water quality expert is to come up with best management practices to reduce turbidity and other impacts during the construction. So we're looking at the baseline conditions, and we're coming up with recommendations for that.
That's good.
Public safety as part of this bridge project is very important because there are two passenger vessels that are docked nearby and that would continue to operate during the bridge work. We told DEP, and so is the harbor master, that continuing the operation of those boats where they are now during the bridge project that is not acceptable, and DOT is looking at alternatives to that. Go back, John. The Eversource transmission project is very, very interesting. That Eversource has recently proposed a new route that would not go underneath the city dock, but would avoid it to the north. And as you can imagine, based on the things I've said, the interests of the commission and with respect to the development of that facility, the main interest is to ensure that the city is not limited in any way in the future for maintaining and replacing that facility as a result of that electric undergrounding project that take the wires off the high towers. We have a number of we're getting to the end here. We have a number of water quality projects that we've worked on. And one of the projects I think we're most proud of is the study that we did of runoff pollution and highway pollution from the Yankee Doodle I-95 bridge. And as a result of the work that we did there, again, with a water quality expert, that clearly made the relationship between highway pollutants and the pollutants in the sediment under the bridge, DOT revised its bridge refurbishment plans to capture the runoff from 85% of the bridge deck, rather than having it go directly into the harbor as it did before. So the Harbor Commission, the Water Quality Committee, the Shellfish Commission, ongoing attention to what water quality matters, John. The statewide initiatives that we're talking about, we continue to work with other towns, other commissions. That slide that you see there is a meeting that was sponsored in part by the Norwalk Commission to discuss the Long Island Sound Blue Plan, which was a statewide effort that affect all municipalities. And then your land use plan. And to the extent that I've taken the liberty to switch your drawing so that like people that
north and south.
I'm teasing you, but the areas that are in your study area are areas that are addressed in the harbor management plan that the commission is very familiar with, and what you come up with, I don't know when it's implemented through zoning regulations, it's subject to review and approval by the commission. And just quickly, John, go through the acknowledgement. Just go two more, John. One more.
Oh, wait.
And
Oh, yeah.
Tony Mobilia and Pat DeVito and Frank Strouch, we want to mention that those three individuals contributed a tremendous amount to the work that we've done for the last over 30 years. Well, not all for 30 years, but we recognize their contributions and that they set an example for all of us who are working for the public interest, not the interest of specific individuals or groups. So that's our background. We also put together not to do this now, or we could, a presentation of your study area. So if you wanted to talk about anything that you see in the impressions that you have, we can do that with respect to the photos that we put together.
And
I'm sorry for talking so long, but that it's important to us, and so
We really appreciate it.
yeah, it was really excellent, and it's what an incredible resource, and not because of your knowledge, but your long history with this. Do you mind if we ask a couple of jurisdictional questions before we get into some of the specific content about the
please do
the study area? Because I think that this is often where the rubber hits the road, and I'm curious, for example, in all the thoughtful work that you're doing, tracking utilities and CONDOT with your analyses and recommendations and requirements for water quality, let's say, do you have, because I've worked on a couple of projects that involve CONDOT, does the commission have authority to require a response from CONDOT, or is that because you're out in front of them as part of the public process? Is it a carrot or a stick, or is it a frozen carrot? I mean, your requirements to change scope. A frozen carrot is when you don't have actual jurisdictional power, but you've been politically wily enough that you beat them with the frozen carrot and they do what you want them to. I'm just curious what statutory authority you have versus just being part of the process at the right time in the right place.
That's good.
I can,
Yeah.
I can address, unless you guys want to say something, I can,
You know.
you want me to talk? to
Yeah.
you?
Right.
Yeah, John, Jeff, why don't you
We
speak to
can
that,
respond to that. Yes.
what our authorities are, and
Right.
our interrelationship with DEP.
It's interesting
Yeah,
but you're right, that the authority is the key question. And how do you influence the advance of the policies of the plan? When DOT started their project, well, two examples. I'll mention the I-95 bridge first. When the upper harbor was dredged, the material underneath the bridge was contaminated to the extent that it couldn't go into Long Island Sound, so that there was a substantial added cost to that, which the city was responsible for a percentage of that. And they've essentially buried the contaminated material. We argued at the time that the contamination was coming from the bridge, and the DOT should contribute to that as well. They objected to that and said that they did not agree to that. This was back in 2015 or thereabouts. That they objected to that, and they said that maybe when they get around to rebuilding the bridge, they would do something with the storm drains. But in the meantime, their principal concern was public safety, getting the water off of the highway, off of the bridge deck. Now they came back with a plan for refurbishing the bridge that didn't do anything with stormwater, just had it going through the 99 or so or 98 drains that go directly into the harbor. We then argued that was not correct, and we retained a water quality consultant who did a very good study for us, and also the research that in other states there are prohibitions against direct discharge of road deck runoff to waterways. That got other towns interested, including the town of Westport, because there was a bridge project over the Saugatuck River. We met with DOT, but we were not trying to point fingers or threatening lawsuits as someone from people from other towns were. We were trying to say this could be done. And so that was a cooperative way, and DOT changed their plan for that. Now,
because you were helping them solve a problem that maybe they were discovering in a cost-effective way too.
They could solve it, but the role of that was that they needed a DEP permit, state permit to do this work. And the commission has a specific role in that permit process, which is to review the pre-application plans. And then of course there's a public notice and there's provisions for public hearing. That's the process that we're working with DOT on the Walk Bridge project. They need a state permit to do that.
And
So-
because your point of leverage was through this sophisticated analysis and an actual understanding of the issues, the comments that you were making rose to the top as issues they had to address versus the other kinds of comments they would get as part of a public process anyway.
Yeah, well, Tim, we got information from the Army Corps regarding the effluent, the sediment under each one of the bridges of concern. And all the effluent was, I should say the sediment was pretty much had the same type of contaminant. So it didn't take much to put two and two together and say where the contamination was coming from. And obviously it was the runoff from the I-95 bridge. So we had the chemical analysis of comparable sediment material that had to be disposed of. And this is why we're very, very sensitive about what goes in, especially in and around Noack Harbor, what goes into Noack Harbor, because whatever goes into Noack Harbor, we own. And when we own it, then we become responsible for either having to remove it and then cap it or put it in some location that's going to cost the taxpayers a sizable amount of money.
No, I mean, I appreciate the kind of the the focus on water quality and the work you've done. I'm just trying to get a handle on
Yeah.
the the structure in Connecticut is different than Massachusetts. I'm
Yes, I noticed
yeah,
that most of your work was done in Massachusetts, and I don't know if you have we have a very unique harbor, and that uniqueness there is not only with the water quality, as far as the importance of water quality with regard to sediment in the harbor, but also what goes in the main construct of the water that is going to affect the shellfish
water,
resources.
water
So
quality, water quality is a huge issue in Massachusetts too. It's just the jurisdictional roles are a little bit different, and I'm interested more in less in the content of this issue, which is, believe me, vital for us too, but more what roles the different commissions and entities play to sort it out. So I'm more interested in the kind of, at least with my question about the kind of the mechanics of the interrelationship of the parties. I think a related question I have, which is very interesting to me, is it seems that the commission has ultimate and final authority over the use of the water sheet. And so once you cross from land to water sheet, the commission has the authority to decide docks or not those uses on the water sheet. Is that true?
No.
That's interesting. But that gets into the relationship between the municipalities of Harbor Management Authority and the state DEP and the Army Corps Authority. So the Harbor Management Act and the Harbor Management Plan doesn't supersede or eliminate those state authorities.
No, let me rephrase my question. At the municipal level, your commission has ultimate authority when interacting with those other entities. I didn't mean, of course, yeah.
Has the principal authority, but then that's what I kept mentioning about the municipal coastal program. I mean, that's primarily a land use program. So that was what the Coastal Management Act set up, which was implementation of the state's coastal management policies through municipal master plans and zoning regulations. But the Planning and Zoning Authority ends at the mean high water line. The Harbor Management Authority is through a separate act of the legislature. Again, the coastal management policies are still relevant, but the Harbor Commission's direct authority is waterward of mean high water. Planning and zoning is landward, but the two authorities interact on the waterfront.
Right.
So
okay.
The state statute then calls for the review by the Harbor Commission of all land use proposals that affect the real property on intercontiguous to the harbor. And that's in the state statute. Now that provides that if a land use board receives an unfavorable recommendation from the Harbor Commission, but it has to be not with respect to, like the height of the buildings or the color of the paint or something, but something affecting the harbor, then the land use boards needs a 2/3 vote to approve a project that hasn't received. So there's an interaction for planning purposes with the land use authorities, and then there's the Harbor Commission's role in the state permitting process.
No, that's helpful. I just wanted to know the precise mechanics of that because at the very beginning of a project, it's important to know the points of leverage. I mean, I think on the content side, I think from this presentation, which was excellent, it's very clear the kind of priorities within your current plan and your current initiatives and where they stand relative to the kind of context setting for us. But it's also helpful to get a slightly clearer picture of the interactions between the state, the commission, Steve and his team, and other people in municipal government and how they interact, because it's useful to know what conversations to have in what order, right? That's really why I was asking.
Tim, big picture is in general, Norwalk is an asset to the marine community. We have fulfilled a role of an ever eroding base of support system. We have many marinas, boat clubs, private clubs, moorings, many boats here. And because they've been eroding in other areas such as Stamford, Greenwich, they all come and look to Norwalk's mechanics, boat facilities, winter storage, facilities to remove moorings, docks, tackle. And those resources are very important. It's an ancillary kind of thing. It's like when Remington Arms went down in Connecticut and they moved out of state. There were hundreds of little shops and stores and businesses and tool and die companies that got put out of business at the same time. And that's the erosive effect of sometimes developing. So there is a designed area, that marine use area. I know developers are champing at the bit, jumping up and down and want to see these luxurious buildings along the coastline. That's all and good. We're pro-development. But in this case, we have to consider the ancillary businesses that exist there. And that leads me to a question for you guys. I know you talk to stakeholders, and those stakeholders could primarily be the property owners, the ones that have owned these lands for years and years and years and years, which they knew at the time when they bought it or inherited it or invested in it, what that use was and what its limitations were. Now, developers are banging on their door, trying to talk to the town about maybe possible changes of zones, having studies done that may be favorable to them. And yet we're looking at a displacement of a major industry and asset to the city of Norwalk.
Yeah, just John, so that you know, we typically get hired to do these studies to help cities convince the publics that cities need industrial areas and marine dependent areas too. So we're, you know, if you look at our longer list of plans that we've done, our specialty are industrial waterfronts and industrial areas, because, you know, outside of the context of this project, cities need places where jobs happen and where, you know, over the dock businesses and industries need to happen. So I think there's this misconception that we're the leading edge of a pro redevelopment for residential lifestyle development here. And I just want to be very clear to everybody on this call that that's not true at all. I think the other thing is that the stakeholders we've talked to include a couple of property owners that, you know, own property in the marina area, let's say, but it also was mostly focused on talking to the owners of industrial businesses who use the waterfront as part of their business. And so our perspective from the first round of stakeholder interviews is Norwalk Harbor is like busy town with the most diverse range of industries that are actually using the waterfront actively. And so that's our takeaway so far. Again, it's an initial discussion. But again, I want to reassure this group that that this is we're not a Trojan horse to, you know, convert Norwalk's waterfront to other uses than many of the ones that you're talking about.
Tim, you want to?
Yeah.
Yeah, Tim, we have a question. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go on, Jeff.
And sorry, cut us off, but we were talking too much. But as part of your study, are you looking at economic factors that would influence waterfront redevelopment? And we talked about that during the POCD, and the planning department indicated, I believe, at that time that was going to be looked at. So would you be able to tell us now that, well, there's no expectation that a new waterfront terminal handling sand and gravel or scrap metal or a fuel depot is going to be established on the Norwalk waterfront? And so I think, is that part of your?
I think that we
look at the economics that would affect waterfront redevelopment.
I mean, we will look at economics as they influence the relative viability of different redevelopment scenarios, partly to then recommend tweaks to the zoning, maybe to keep what are considered highest and best uses from changing the uses along the water, you know, we need to look at economics to understand what the market economy would do if there weren't regulations in place to preserve some of these uses. So that's one item on the list, which is important to understand because
Right.
we can imagine today, many of us, what those highest and best uses might be. And they might not be the best fit for relative to Norwalk's overall economic development strategy. I think the other piece of it is that there are, like the shellfish industry, there are certain, let's say, market advantages that Norwalk has already because of legacy businesses, because of advantages that your harbor have that can't be found in most other places in Connecticut that we have to recognize too, which is what attributes does Norwalk Harbor have that aren't replicated elsewhere on Long Island Sound, and that becomes a policy consideration. That's also, I would say, is an economic consideration that is less about a hard market analysis, but more about framing strategies to think through what larger economic development strategy is tied to, let's say, our land use regulations as they relate to the harbor management plan. We don't have a market analyst on our team as a sub-consultant who's been scoped to do any kind of deep dive analysis, but we do have Kevin Hively, who's an economic development consultant, to help us with these larger framing questions relative to building on the narrative and the story that we heard tonight, maybe adding other ingredients to it, maybe questioning some of them if we find in our research that some of the, the other issue we have to understand is that there are certain uses on New England's waterfronts, and I'll use New England very broadly to talk about our experience, in Massachusetts and in Connecticut and in Rhode Island, that that are critical from a regional perspective, have to be on the waterfront, and actually couldn't go anyplace else because they couldn't get permitted today, or the port infrastructure doesn't exist for them to go anyplace else. And so this is always a tough conversation with communities, which is we don't want to have a road salt port here. And this is not an issue for you, but it's an issue in many communities. But there, in terms of logistics and supply chain, salt for treating the roads in the winter has to go someplace, or we're all going to slip around. And so, and this is usually a tough conversation with municipalities, which is why it came up with the industrial study. Why does Norwalk have to be a place where all of the contractor yards are? Well, they have to be someplace. And, so this is the example of the kinds of discussions we're going to want to be having with you. Does that make sense? It doesn't completely answer your question, but I would say that those are economic development considerations.
No, I understand. Yeah.
I have a couple of questions.
All right.
If I may interject.
Well, I know I saw Diane Lawrence-Chow had her hand up here. I thought maybe Diane. Do you have a question?
Let Joe go first, and then I'll follow up.
Okay, thank you. All right.
Thank you, Diane.
Sorry.
I have three general questions. The first one, on your staff, do you have anybody that deals with climate change and how that's going to impact this area? This is a FEMA designated flood zone. And Water Street is called Water Street because we don't even need a storm in order for that area to flood. Just a good spring tide will make that flood. So unless you have industries that are adaptable to this and it's getting worse rather than better, this has to be considered.
Yeah, we were the authors of the recently approved flood resiliency zoning overlay for the city of Boston that was just approved just 2 weeks ago. So it's a particular area of expertise, and
something we've already been hearing from a lot of stakeholders about, and also something that we've already sort of started mapping in our existing conditions. So it absolutely is something that we'll be able to address meaningfully, from our team's expertise.
I taught at the high school and college level, and somewhere in my head, I have it that you have to be somewhat nuts to develop an area that is a designated flood zone.
If only we
Here
could
you
put you
are.
on tour for the rest of the US. There's so many people who don't seem to understand that.
And is there a good reason for that?
Well, I think it has to do with the time frame of the investment. There are developers who, develop for rent residential projects, plan to hold on them for only a certain number of years, and then sell the asset to a different real estate entity or a REIT or something. And they've made the calculus that in that time frame, the value of the asset won't change enough, despite rapidly changing regulations, to affect their ultimate development strategy. I think the other piece of it too is that there are ways to build in a floodplain by, putting all residential uses above the mean floodplain. We've done a lot of mapping of the effects of climate change along the Massachusetts coast with accurate mapping to 2070, including storm surge through a couple of models. And we use those kinds of tools in our work in Massachusetts to help fairly progressive municipal governments raise the flood standards much higher than what FEMA requires. And that's true in the city of Boston. It's true with the Port Authority of Massachusetts. So I think that there are responsible ways to build in the floodplain, and that's something that I think we can address as part of this plan.
It's the irony is in this harbor, it's not just water that we worry about. In Sandy, and again, Sandy here was a tropical storm. It was not a major hurricane. We had 30-foot vessels that ended up sitting on Water Street. So you have vessels crashing around, potentially docks if the pilings are too short. During the perfect storm, we had waves crashing into second-story windows just down from the area that you're working in. These are other factors, and it's not just water. And unless people have lived in these areas and seen what these storms deliver in addition to water, I still have to question the rationale. Yes, you can build anything, but is it worth it?
I mean, I think that this is like a conversation that so many communities, coastal communities across the US are having right now. And it's like part of what this process, we won't dive into like the level of detail that was included when we were specifically coming up with the, zoning guidelines for the city of Boston for their floodplain. But I think what we can do is really, share like your concerns about this with, as we're having conversations with people about sort of scenarios for the waterfront, and sort of bake in the, what we think is most responsible to help guide development. And for those landowners that, have already, they have buildings, they have assets, they have development on this land already. There needs to be some way that they can, continue to own and operate whatever they have currently, given the sort of what they're up against. It's sort of a delicate balance of like, existing property owners, their development rights versus the long-term risks and, climate change impacts. So I think we'll be kind of leaning on you for your sense of what the right balance is. And we'll also be talking to other people to try and come up with something that feels like, a good compromise between the sort of the needs of the property owners that are in the floodplain, and sort of the broader concerns about resiliency for the community.
Diane, you have a question from the water quality? Diane, you
Oh,
wanna
I
introduce yourself?
thought that Joe said that he had 3 questions, but
I got them.
He's all set.
you all set? Okay. All right. Well, first of all, thank you so much for this discussion tonight. And I'm so happy that Mayor Rilling is on the call or was on the call. And this is so important for the future of our harbor. I was one of the first harbor management commissioners back when Bill Collins was mayor. I was the only female, and at the time I helped write the first plan, but it's changed a lot for the better since then. What I just wanted to suggest also, there is a longer list, so I would love maybe to discuss it offline or at another time, and that is looking at the economics of the future development on both the west side and the east side of this harbor. We have to also look at the former industrial uses and the legacy sites where you have contamination that either has not been cleaned up but has been capped in place, or there still are ongoing questions as to what the status is of a particular site. I'll just name a few. There are more. I was once a regulator, senior regulator with the DEP back in the 80s and did some of these site inspections. I just wanted to lay that out because quite frankly, much of the future economic development, we need to include this question and identification because some will take a lot more money to clean up or cap, and there will be restrictions on the use of that land, even if we no longer have any marine industry up north like at Divine Brothers. So I'll just name a few, and everyone on this call are old and young salts, so they could add more. I can as well. So on the west side, starting at the top near Wall Street, we have the former gas plant, which is owned by Yankee Gas, and you have coal tar. The reason why that site hasn't been developed is that there are restrictions because of all the coal tar that was buried on site. Now, the coal tar doesn't move, doesn't leach unless there's other uses on top of the land to start breaking that up. But if you were to dig into that, it smells like mothballs. It's pretty unpleasant. And that is currently restricting its development. So you need to know, and that's quite a bit of acreage, but it was a habit and custom to create gas for the gas lights. There are pictures of how it was a heavy industrial use. It must have smelled like the high heavens back in the day. Also on the west side, of course, we have Divine Brothers. We also have our former, if you go below 90, well, we have King Industries. We have former municipal landfill with some questions at times about closure monitoring and leaching potential. Again, and then lastly, going below the Water Street area, Washington Street rather, the bridge, you have the old Petco, P-E-T-C-O, above ground storage tanks that used to hold, it was a working harbor, and there were large oil tanks that you would see if you did an environmental site assessment dating back, of course, to before the 1900s. But this was, of course, in the, I guess, the 40s, 50s. You had large above ground tanks. Rumor has it that there's still floatable oil contained, what is now a working, but not as highly used marine area with marinas and storage. If you go to the east side, starting at the top, of course, we do have some development that was cleaned up to housing standards with the head of the harbor. It used to be an industrial site, and they've been satisfied that it has been cleaned up for that kind of development. Let's see, on the east side, the ONG site, there are rumors about it has great potential for all sorts of development, but they do have a lot of their spent asphalt on top, and I'm sure there are groundwater issues. There is a Platt Street former drum dump that I attempted to get the city and state to look at a while ago. I am going to revive that review because we still have an unfinished cleanup on 23 Platt Street. It's a great location though. There are marinas on there, and so that's something that I think could be of great. That was an industrial site. Now I think there's mixed use zone on it that needs to be looked at. We have the water pollution control site where we have some old, I guess, I forget, it's a storage site of some of the old materials that were dug up in order to put in the tertiary treatment site. I guess it's called Martin's Mound, right just due north of the railroad tracks. Of course, then lastly, we have Vets Park, which is a former landfill. There is a Vets Park redevelopment plan that I hope the staff have shared with UTIL, because it was well done. A lot of the public weighed in, but there are questions about how much of that can be developed because of the dumping material, that some of which is still there. So this is just a sampling. I hope that it helps. Thank you.
Yeah, that's so useful to know. I mean, it has a massive impact on the long-term sort of economic trajectory of any property. And, it's best if the zoning takes that into account and doesn't prohibit things that can, help to encourage, environmentally responsible redevelopment for those sites, especially those that are sitting vacant. It can be a real barrier if developers or investors are looking at a site and they have a great idea, but they know that they're going to have to not only get through all of the sort of state and federal level approvals, but they're also going to have to pursue a zoning variance or rezoning. So I think that just having that lay of the land is so useful. We usually have to do a lot of our own research to dig up that kind of information. In general, I wish most of our projects started with the level of information that you guys have been able to give us. This is like such a boost.
Yeah. Zoe, let me, in the interest of time, we have the study area that we'd like to go through, and many of the points that Diane had brought up will probably be incorporated in much of what we will review at the present time. So if you don't mind, I'd like to, I think I can share the screen. I think I'm sharing the screen here already.
That's great. And Diane, is that in your head or is that on a map, your recounting of the environmental issues?
It is both in my head and on a map. The state of Connecticut has the former potential dump areas or industrial areas. So there are records of all of these in the files. Yeah.
Diane, the Harbor Commission also has, certainly on top of much of the area with regard to the contamination in those various areas. And that's why when we review application review, we always keep that in mind. All right, can you see the screen? I have the screen that shows the aerial views of Planning and Zoning Department. Is that up, Michelle?
I can see it. Yeah.
Okay, we're all set.
Go down, John.
Okay. Okay.
Well, we talked about your study area in
just
the larger presentation, the first presentation. So for the purposes of the harbor management plan, what we're calling the upper harbor is defined in the harbor management plan is the area from the walk bridge upstream on the river to the head of navigation at Wall Street. The part of your study area also includes the waterfront on both sides of the river between the walk bridge and the Route 136 bridge. And as we talked about in the planning and zoning staff meeting, your study area also includes property, I believe, that was acquired by the Department of Transportation. And then once the walk bridge is finished, that property
that's this area here.
Conceivably would be available
Between the walk bridge and
redevelopment.
Strucklano Bridge here.
So that was one question that we had, to what extent that you would be addressing the redevelopment opportunities there. Forgive me again for talking, but this is a good image that happened to take it on a good day, but it shows the South Norwalk Railroad curve. And you know the history of that. That was the cause of the worst disaster in the history of American or world railroading at the time, which was in 1853, and the train was going to the east and didn't stop at the South Norwalk train station. And the engineer said he couldn't see the signal from the bridge keeper, which was a red ball on a pole on the other side of the river. And since he didn't stop at go back, John. Since he didn't stop at the train station, he was going at such a speed that when he went around the curve, he couldn't stop when he saw that the draw was open. So over 40 people were killed at the time, and that was the worst accident in the history of railroading up to that point. So I don't want to say something that results in deaths is interesting, but the historical significance of that is something that, well, it is interesting to some of us. But that again, looking to the upper harbor, John, if you
let's go. Yeah.
The wastewater treatment plant, I believe in your earlier documents, you suggested that this, not the wastewater treatment plant, but some of the DPW facilities could possibly be considered for relocation, which would make this site available for redevelopment. So again, that's something that we would be quite interested in.
And I think the
in
area you're
discussing.
talking about too, Diana, I
Yeah.
think it was right in here, in this area there.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then in 2019, the mall was under construction, and the development like that has a significant water quality impact, and the extent to which new development with the impervious, well, you know that the issue, and this is not something that you're telling us something new about. It's something that we consider with every development project, the extent to which stormwater management
Especially
measures
slippery stuff.
are included. And Diane, you're the facility that you were talking about with the
In this area right here.
right in there
Right in here.
at Platt Street.
Platt Street area.
Yeah. And then the King Industries, your study area includes the west, well, both sides as you go
Right,
up.
yeah.
Believe
You know,
King Industries is a very stable.
We met
stable-
with them, by the way, just to let you know.
Yeah, and
They are very good stewards of the harbor.
And-
Very good stewards of the harbor.
and imagine they told you that they don't have any plans to relocate their facility, even though they have another facility elsewhere in Connecticut.
Yeah, in Danbury.
Yeah, we heard that message loud and clear, but also what you just mentioned, that they're really contribute positively to the community in a lot of ways that, help to uphold shared values. So
Exactly.
There's a federal navigate, that was the phase one of our dredging project, the 100-foot wide, 10-foot deep navigation project
Oh,
that,
that's in here.
again, well, all the way up to the head of navigation. In 1990 served 5 terminals, and now it serves 1. Go ahead, John.
Yeah.
Another view
Another
of
harbor.
the area.
I have just a very brief question about the navigational channel, just because you guys have a sort of a longer view on it. Does this navigational channel tend to fill up quickly with silt and sediment, or is it one that once you've dredged it, it sort of stays clear for a long while?
Well, it was probably about a 20-year hiatus between dredging projects. And that seems to be about, but it depends on certainly the storm surges that we've had
Mhm.
that begin to fill up in certain areas. And we're well aware of the areas that get filled up.
And again, it's a federal channel, and the Corps of Engineers is responsible for maintaining it, but that doesn't mean they have to.
Right,
whether
yeah,
they
there's
dredge
a
it or not
long line, right?
is dependent on the need
Yeah.
and also on the availability of funds.
So as it is right now, Norwalk is the owner of two huge CAD cells, a confined aquatic disposal area, one in this region, well, actually 2 in this region here, and 1 in this region right here, in which the sediment that we own basically has to get put in that CAD cell, and the clean material removed and then capped with some material to go over the top of that CAD cell. So anything that goes into the harbor, and this is the problem that we had before and after the bridge, 1,000 yards, 1,400 feet and 1,000 feet, both sides of the bridge here was the main problem that we had to deal with regard to replacement of that sediment in the area. And that's why we're so conscientious about what goes down from the harbor, from the watershed into Norwalk Harbor in this region here, and everything that flows into this harbor from this side here, because we are the recipient of everything that comes down into this area right here.
It's
So
hard-
it has a significant impact on the economics of the dredging.
Well,
you know,
exactly, because
Yeah.
that's correct. That's correct. And that's why we're very, again, conscientious about what goes in and around this harbor as far as what flows in.
And what's the impact of upriver pollutants too?
Oh,
Is
well, they're right now in the process of removing several dams.
Mhm.
And that's going to obviously set flow of what comes up the upper harbor, up the river, I should say, down into the Norwalk Harbor area right in here. So as far as the contaminants, I'm not sure exactly the types of contaminants that we see, usually metals that usually come down.
Right.
And pollutants come down because there's certain water treatment plants that are up in Wilton area, Ridgefield area, that oftentimes we are the recipient of what comes down that river. And also, again, the aspect of certain heavy metals that line the shore, as Diane had mentioned, with regard to some of the glass place that was here and the industrials that were over here that have to be taken care of, especially with O&G. There's a lot of material that's still
There's some
floating
good
around in there.
views of those, Jonathan. If
Yeah,
we go to
We
the
can
next
go on
slide.
here, yeah.
Yeah, 146, the average daily traffic volume, 146,000 vehicles. I try to imagine that, how many per minute, but
Yeah,
obviously the highway pollutants were
I mean,
significant.
we take runoff from oil trucks, motors, et cetera, automobile tires, the fragments that come off from the automobile tires, that all gets down into here with regard to the heterocyclic amines and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons that begin to accumulate. And we have data to certainly support all of the effluent that goes into this harbor from here that falls directly into the bridge. Now, we're quite fortunate that the DOT has agreed to now treat this water before it goes down into the harbor, capture it into drainage systems that are allowed on both sides of the harbor here.
Has that project been completed, or it's planned for the future for them to do that rehabilitation
It's
that
underway.
captures the stormwater?
It's underway now.
Okay.
It's underway now.
Go ahead, John.
You can see that from Oyster Shell Park.
Got it.
This is also a good image that shows the extent of
Well, this is the upper harbor
of
here.
the urban waterfront, if that's, I guess, the proper term for this. But you can also see, John, you can see the new residential development at the head of the harbor. And
Oh,
also
it's right in here.
Yeah, as you go down through after O&G. Now, this gets into the issue that I'm sure you're aware of, and it's the extent to which new
Dependent
waterfront
uses.
development requires a water dependent component. And I'm telling you, we're revisiting history from the 1980s now, because when the Coastal Management Act defines water dependent uses as the uses that require location on the waterfront, but it also includes uses that provide public access. So that in other words, a principal site use that's not water dependent can be considered water dependent if it provides public access. And then the question becomes, what type and how much, and then you get into waterfront redevelopment that otherwise is not water dependent, and you lose the marine industries.
Well, that is in one of the most unique conditions of a land use mashup that I've ever encountered, that residential development right across the inner harbor, which is very narrow, to heavy industrial uses along
Along this area right here.
yeah, it's almost like a parable or something. And I think that's a really interesting issue, which is what the obligations are to those developers to do just what you're talking about, which is something we certainly want to look at, revisit, and think about.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's see. That's
May I just answer something that Tim Love had asked about upper harbor and upper riverine pollution that may come down into our harbor.
Well, that comes down from here.
Right. And
Right.
so you are very lucky tonight. We have wonderful people on this call helping, but we have not one, but two presidents of the Norfolk River Watershed Association. I'm the founding president back in the 90s. And then we have Louise Washer here, who is the current president of the Norfolk River Watershed Association. And what is stressed is trying to reduce polluted runoff. So if you look at the upper harbor, this is a great slide. Currently, the types of pollution one expects, besides sedimentation, it's highly filled with pervious surfaces, not only rooftops, but a lot of paved surfaces, so that when it does rain, you see there's thermal pollution. There is polluted runoff that includes the things that John and Joff said, heavy metals, etc. There's sediment, there's oils, there's pesticides. And so one thing that we are urging is for our new zoning regs, but also for the purpose of your work here at UTL, and that is seeing when we could have across the board, instead of saying, oh, it might be good if you have a 20-foot vegetative buffer, we would like to see some standards so that all development community would understand that if they want to develop near the harbor or the river, they must include green infrastructure like living rooftops or green roofs. They must include things that will cool down the polluted runoff and must try to incorporate as much, I'm sorry, there's a lot of impervious surfaces, as you can see. We would like to have much more pervious surface by not only with vest pocket parks and soil with native plants, but also things that are pavers that allow infiltration of rainwater so that it cools it down, cleans it up a little bit. And you will see, for instance, in Darien, I was just in Darien at the library, they've taken their, I would like this to be mandated in our city, in our new zone, and I'm going to be advocating, and that is that instead of having the traditional and expensive underground galleries, which you sometimes do need, instead in Darien and in Westport at a church, they have the traditional rain garden. So the parking lot runoff goes into a rain garden that is vegetated. And of course, it keeps the cars from driving into it with nice looking guardrails out of wood. It looks great. And these are the kind of things that I think would help reduce the sedimentation and polluted runoff.
All right. Now we can continue, Diane, if you don't mind. And all right, so we have our upper harbor and all right,
Again, emphasizing the watershed and the relationship between the river, the watershed, the harbor, and Long Island Sound.
Yeah.
Then we put some slides together of your marine commercial area.
In here.
Again, this was the cornerstone of the city's municipal coastal program, and it took several years to be able to enact the marine commercial zoning district because property owners objected to it in the 1980s. So after the Coastal Management Act, the Planning and Zoning Commission relatively quickly, there was a coastal management committee. They updated the master plan, as it was called at the time, but the zoning regulations to again try to encourage and protect truly water dependent uses took some time. And that didn't happen, for several years after the master plan update. And the harbor management plan supports the continuation of that marine commercial zoning district to protect truly water dependent uses. And we have had some initial discussions with interests who would like to proceed, like to propose rezoning to increase the residential density
in this area right here.
that's permitted there.
Yeah.
So that's again a cornerstone of the municipal coastal program, and that if you were to eliminate that marine commercial zone, it would I think invalidate the municipal coastal program approved by that's my. I think you need to involve the DEEP in your discussions here.
Let's see, hold on. This is
Will do. I will just briefly say we don't have any intention of eliminating that, marine commercial zone. We've talked to some of the property owners, and if anything, we'd be making small tweaks to support the continued operations.
I might also mention, and again, we'll finish this meeting. I apologize for talking too much, but in response to Mr. Schneerlein's comment about floodplain development, DEEP recently has made comments in other towns with their DEEP's perspective on increased residential density in the floodplain. And their concern is not so much the building, because you can build to FEMA standards, as Tim said, and you can provide resilient structures, but DEEP's objections have been with respect to more people living in the floodplain, especially when the roads getting to those areas are flooded. So it's not just a question of being able to conform with the FEMA standards. It's an issue of putting more people in the coastal floodplain when the state's policies are to promote resiliency.
This is all the same.
Yeah, it's just different views of the marine commercial area.
Same
and then
thing.
looking, and the navigation channel, as you can see where it goes through here. That was dredged in our phase 2 of the dredging project from 2004 to 2014. But the channel there is,
Sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I have a somewhat selfish question. We oftentimes, when we get to the final stages of plans, you know, when we're putting reports together, it's hard to get a hand on great images of our study area, and you have shown us so many great images. I'm wondering, when we get to that point, if you would be open to us using some of these images to help sort of, you know, tell the story of the planning process and the study area.
Well, yeah, we can
of
discuss
course.
that, but I wanted to bring up that point because you did use a photo of Mr. Stedman's in the
Yeah, that's
very
fine,
beginning.
John.
I understand that,
That's fine.
but I mean, I do a lot of publishing, and before we publish any article, we get permission from the author, whether it's a previous article or whether it's a photo, in order to get permission to use that particular photo.
You have my permission to use the images with the proper citation. But we're sensitive to that because not everyone does make the proper citations when we
No,
share
appreciate that.
our images with them. But no, that's fine. And I'll have some more perhaps in the next before the leaves turn color too. This is another interesting, again, it's a winter view, of course, but
this
you
is
can see the
important area here.
shallow areas here.
But this is a critical.
And that's part of the reason why Norwalk is such a valuable shellfish resource area. Because the shellfish resources, as you know, don't just include the populations of the shellfish, they include the habitat from which the food for the shellfish is generated. So those very shallow areas are valuable shellfish habitat. And another interesting bit of history, the designation of those areas as significant habitat, natural clam and oyster beds, goes back to the late 1800s with a Superior Court designation, recognizing that those areas have never been dredged and they provide valuable habitat for the shellfish in the outer part of the harbor. And we're also, with the Shellfish Commission and the Harbor Commission, working with UConn and the Bureau of Aquaculture on what they're calling their Connecticut Shellfish Restoration Project. We're hoping that this area south of Vets Park will be considered as a pilot, or it's a candidate area now, but that we can design measures to improve the shellfish resource there.
Is the location of the former landfill an issue with that, John?
Apparently not. That's what the study is all about.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, that study is all about. And apparently, well, I can probably have Mr. Bardish, maybe if you'd like to chime in on that area, because he was directly involved with that, Mr. Bardish with the Shellfish Commission. And this area has been looked at as a very, as a potential highly desirable area for restoration, this area right here.
Yeah, so Tim, it wouldn't be used for harvest, but it would essentially be a rookery place for shellfish gametes and larvae to populate downriver, essentially flush with the tide.
So again, that's why we're very protective, again, certainly of this industrial area right here and this feeding area here. That's a very, very big concern to us.
So it's supportive of the larger ecosystem.
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
John,
Yes, Joe.
one of the things that old dump, if you go back to Jeff's old map, the shape of that park actually is affecting the shape of that mud flat because of the way the current comes down and deposits the sediments. And you can actually see how it's curving in towards the cove. Earlier, when that park wasn't as big, it was more of a direct shoot and it went more south than swinging around to the east.
Oh, right in here.
Yes.
Yes.
Go down, John, and we can get through these.
Yeah, we'll get finished with this here,
Yeah,
because this is another important area right here.
A lot of text on that, but that's, of course, Veterans Park and the East Norwalk Basin. And talking about interesting history, the Veterans Park, you know, it was a Seaview Avenue dump, but there was also an act of the state legislature, since that was tidelands, underwater lands, an act of the state legislature giving the city permission to develop a park there. That's, again, interesting local history. The East Norwalk Basin, we talked about this previously, but this is not part of your study area. You identified it as a supporting area. I wasn't quite sure why, but for harbor management purposes, it's a significant area for the commission and the harbor management plan. In a winter view, again, talking about runoff from the area of the East Norwalk train station, eventually entering the East Norwalk Basin through that mill pond, which was contaminated with the hat factory, right?
Yeah.
With mercury years ago.
That factory is up in this region up
Yeah,
here.
we'll get into that, but talking about legacy pollution. And the East
Love-
Norwalk Marina, the city is, it's not part of your study, but the city is pursuing a
Redevelopment.
rebuilding of that at this time. So that was our effort to show your study area and to see if anybody had any comments. If the slides made anyone think about some important points, but we certainly
Really
appreciate the
useful.
opportunity to talk tonight.
Incredibly helpful. Can we get a copy of this as
Yes.
we trade?
Yes.
That would
Yeah.
be, it's a great resource for us. And
Yeah, we'll have Michelle can send, we'll download a copy, send it over to Michelle.
And also put
Great.
it on the city website too, because I
Yeah.
think that if there are people that are interested, or I
Yeah.
don't know how many members of the public are looking at this meeting, that there's an earlier version on the website. We'll replace it with this.
We'll send that to you, Michelle.
Okay, sounds good.
All right, let's continue on. I'd like to open it up, and I'd like to see some questions from others sitting on these commissions and groups for the consultants, not so much to allay fears, but just to see what's direction they're heading, and maybe be a little more specific with the marine users and whom you contacted and the results of those interviews.
Sure. If in terms of the stakeholder interviews that we've done so far, some of them we were in attendance for. There's some that also the city has conducted, without us. But we did speak to some property owners in the marine commercial area along Water Street. We spoke to King Industries and Divine Brothers and O&G. With the intention of understanding some of the more kind of heavy industrial users and their needs on the waterfront. We did also speak to some other kind of, local government representatives. And let me go back in time, think about it. Who else? I don't know if Laura or wants to fill in any missing.
And clarify, these were small group meetings. We didn't meet with these owners separately, as separate sessions. They were kind of cohorts that represented different issues. We thought it was healthier at the beginning of the process to get a general sense from groups of people.
Yeah, but if you're going to start to drill in, which I suggest we suggest that you do. I mean, on several pieces of those properties, there's multiple water dependent users. One particular property, there's at least 7, if not more, water dependent users. So, and I've heard from several of them, their concern is that, hey, I'm going to get put out of business. What do I do? Where do I go? It's not like they could move inland somewhere. There are some businesses that can. There's some in Liberty Square that work primarily on boats, but they're not water dependent. They go to the boat. So they could be a mile away, 10 miles away, and still navigate to do their business and have a viable operation if they were to move off of the purview of the water. But others that need to work on boats, launch, sea trial, remove tackle, clean it, get it back, store it for the winter, put it back in, because it's a requirement of all the moorings, and the Norwalk has got hundreds of moorings that need to be attended to. All the docks, whether they're private or mostly private per se, have to be removed for the winter at the end of the season and taken on shore. And that's got to be done from the water and stored. So, I would think valuable to interview those people directly to see what kind of impact they're looking at for their businesses.
Absolutely.
Hey, John. Laura Kenny here.
Hi, Laura.
As we spoke about in the past, we have interviewed a lot of the kind of marine use business owners on Water Street. We spoke with Bobby Bloom's son this morning, actually. But and the rest of and the Blooms over on Cops Island Oysters. But if you have a list of businesses that you think we should interview specifically, I think that could be helpful to the process, because as much as I know, we've reached out to a lot of them. It sounds like,
I had mentioned one when we met 10 days ago, let's say,
yeah,
and you said that they weren't being cooperative, and I called the guy because he's a friend. He goes, he was never contacted. And
okay. Yeah, I think I know who you're talking about. We called them on the phone and in the very beginning of this study, and they mentioned they weren't interested, but I could call them again. To answer Diane's question, yes, we also met with the boat clubs and marinas in the study area. So we haven't gone down to the Gardella Marina down by Calf Pasture Beach, but we have spoken to the Gardellas at Rex Marina. And then we've also spoken with a few of the yacht clubs in the area, Marine Max, United Marine, Total Marine. Yeah, and then some of the yacht clubs, all the industrial, as many as the industrial properties as we could to the north. So like King, O&G, Divine Brothers. There's a few properties we haven't spoken to towards the north. One of them is the Yankee Gas property, just because they were a little bit tough to get in touch with, but we're planning a meeting with them next week. And we also haven't spoken to the ice manufacturers on the north end of the harbor. But if there's anyone else that you can think of, I think it would be great if you sent us an email with that list.
you have the tax records. You know who's paying taxes on their businesses, so it's easier for you to access than us.
All right.
Yeah, I think that I mean, we'll be running a lot of, throughout the process, there will be moments where there's sort of more open, public input, and we're in this sort of early phase. We've been doing more, focused stakeholder outreach to just help us understand some of the issues and different sort of thematic groupings of business types along the waterfront or use types along the waterfront. So I think that, we'll be kind of doing the sort of comprehensive scans that you mentioned of kind of trying to just cover our bases, reach out to the public in a broad way. But if there's any sort of concerns that you guys are hearing about through your networks, people that are approaching you with things that they're upset about or things that they, concerns they have about the process, it would be really helpful if you could sort of direct them our way or sort of, raise a red flag for us, just so we know that those, that those people are looking for more information or that they're feeling disconnected from the process. Oftentimes, that sort of individual connection will go a long way to try and, bring people along and get good input from people.
You
so
have
that
to
we can make better
understand the
decisions.
seafaring mindset and mentality. These are the guys that get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. They're all hardworking. They go about their daily chores. They work till late at night. They're not activist type people. They just want to get along with their lives and their livelihood and maybe pass it on to their children as time goes by, and just have a unaffected life. Norwalk is riddled with those types of people going back to seafaring days. They're in their mindset, they're worried and concerned, but they say that in their head that, well, someone else owns the property and I'm at their will, whatever happens. And I guess the big picture is for you guys to look at the big picture. And quite frankly, I think we had a very good discourse tonight, back and forth both ways. I look at it as very much a positive, and that you have some awarenesses you didn't have before, things to consider that you didn't consider or may have considered, but you're looking at it possibly in a different light now. And that's all good. Just that, you know, we want the right thing to be done at the end of the day. We have, you know, when these uses and zones were formulated and approved, it was a different time, and of course, but if you look at what's been going on in other towns and the dissolving of these areas, it's brought more business to Norwalk. And if we were to lose that ability to service, let's say the oyster boats and all the different marinas that are here, the boat clubs, which are many, the mooring and clubs that are many, very many, those boats will have to travel, you know, way out of the area, and someone else will be, you know, generating those dollars, it's not a resource within our town. And that's, you know, what we're hoping that will be considered in the long run. You look at the towns and the change of the makeup and the skyline, and with all the different high rises that get put there, they're great. If you know, if there were condos, it would be different. It's ownership. It's a different scenario. As Mr. Love pointed out earlier, they put up these projects. They wind up with some tax credits in many cases, and at the end of the day, they turn around and flip it to a REIT, which will bring it on to the next level. So they don't have a concern overall, other than what they're forced to do in terms of construction along the water line for storms and wind and tides and the like. You know, this is an old town. It's not brand new. We go back many generations. It's got a cosmopolitan feel to it. In many ways, our waterfront should have had more historic designation than maybe it's had in the past. But big picture, you know, we'd like to maintain that hometown feel. Everybody likes to come. They may not live on the water, but they like to come down and look at it. And they marvel in looking over the bridges or vistas in the type of operations and boatyards and the like that we have there. It's part of the pleasantry of being a citizen of Norwalk, even if they're not utilizing the water itself. It's a good thing for them to be involved in and be a part of in this city. So that's all. I would like, does anybody else have any other questions or concerns moving forward? I don't really see anyone hands up.
Yeah,
Well,
John, yeah,
maybe-
just a couple
maybe-
more questions.
Couple questions as we
Yep.
proceed. You know, rather than the Harbor Commission being interviewed and we make comments that, but I think that at some point when we see proposals that are presented, then the commission would have a formal role in responding in a formal way with recommendations and comments. So in that regard, the commission is more than a stakeholder. It has certain authorities to be applied, and then we would implement those when we as we move forward. So we look forward to you know, sharing information with you and
Well, you know, I think back to Zoe's presentation of our schedule. You know, this is the research, fact-finding, getting educated phase of the project. And then we're going to come with you with some alternative scenarios that represent, you know, a range of, you know, approaches to keep it exactly as it is, tinker around the edges, maybe make some larger land use recommendations, and we're going to bring those to you to get your feedback. And in that case, we'll have not only the scenarios, but some of the data associated with each of them. So I think that'll be where the conversation gets very rich about trade-offs or not. And but that's down the line a little bit. We have to get up to speed to where you are before we can even start to think about this.
Fair enough.
Question might be, are you, to what extent does the POCD influence what you can come up with? And I'm trying to recall what the POCD's land use recommendations are for that marine commercial area, but I think they left in the marine commercial zone. So are you the recommendations you come up with, are they going to be formed in part by what the POCD already says for these areas, or?
That's probably a question for Steve or Laura or somebody from the city. I don't, we're also navigating the levels of obligations and kind of the jurisdictional touch points that's an AP, policy question that I'm not prepared to answer right now.
Sure. Yeah, so the POCD, of course, informs all of the studies, and we kind of look at the goals of that to determine how we'll proceed. So nothing that will come out of this study will directly contradict or go against anything in the POCD. I think the goal of this study is to kind of take a deeper dive into some of the suggestions that came out of the POCD.
And the last thing I might say, when we were talking about water quality, provisions or requirements in the zoning regulations, I think we can think about what those might be regardless of any sort of study of waterfront conditions. You want to include green infrastructure, and we looked at the city of Stamford has a sustainability scorecard, I think, so that a development that provides certain environmental enhancements, gets extra credit for what they might want to do. So some of these initiatives for zoning and sustainability, I think, we know what they might be right now, I think. But anyway, we look forward to participating in this and hopefully being a positive influence.
Yeah, and like I said, the POCD looks, maybe it's a very terse way of looking at it, as far as the policies are held, that the POCD is looking at from the land toward the water. The harbor management plan from its policies is looking from the water to the landward side. So we're trying to come in between what that medium is, basically.
Just to
And how
go,
you review the policies in each one of those plans.
just to go back in history, when I first came to Norwalk and was looking for a place to buy or stay, I was very quickly warned about a whole bunch of homes that were built in an area that were sinking.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that?
Very well.
Yeah. How quick
I wasn't
that
involved
gets-
with that, but I do remember. Yes.
Correct. How quick that gets out of our heads. And in all conscience, getting back to this, I can't see us approving a project we know will flood. Even if you're building it higher than that. That's like saying to the guys that build it, okay, you're going to build it, you're going to have people move in, and they're on their own. And we're not taking responsibility for some care of where we put people to live. And I'll shut up.
So I just had, echoing what Joe said, that is an interesting choice of our government, local and state and federal. The Washington Street replacement was using federal funds and state funds and local funds, was rebuilt in a floodplain. Now, definitely we can build anywhere. We're amazing engineers, but should we when other lands are available and those, so it'll be interesting to see what happens on Water Street. But what I just wanted to point out, no matter whether it's marine commercial development or residential along the industrial areas, for UTL, if you were to take another sailboat or boat ride up the harbor above I-95, you'll see the interesting backyards of some of these places. So first you'll see what we all know as the medical center, all kinds of stories behind that, why there's a huge surface parking lot. I would love to see that be pervious surfaces at one point. But if you were to continue north just slightly, you will see the former Catherine Gibbs School. Initially, the residential building that was going to be placed on top of it was going to be blocking the view of the entire site because, of course, everyone wanted to see the beautiful vista of the harbor. There was an agreement with the developer and the city, this is before Steve's time, to turn the buildings so that they were now you can, from the street, you can actually see the harbor. And I think it looks like a better development there. If you go further north, what precipitated the placement or orientation of buildings, which is important no matter what the use is, that is a kind of a scissor roof line of condos. That is what harbor commissions, I hope, will, and zoning commissions will not allow anymore, because it's just north of the Catherine Gibbs School, of maybe 3 sites north or 7. It blocks the view shed from East Avenue because it was built parallel to the harbor and the river instead of perpendicular. So that's just another off suggestion.
Absolutely. We'll definitely take that into account. It's certainly a you know, part of the character of any waterfront city to have, you know, a public connection to, whether it's visual or physical, but you know, cutting people off from their waterfront is rarely a good idea in the grand scheme of things. So we'll certainly keep that in mind and sort of work with you on that as we get closer to sort of dimensional standards or sort of any proposals about building massing and orientation. Any last questions, comments, concerns, ideas?
I guess I would step in here and say for the steering committee, we do have Steve on board from the Shellfish Commission, but there was another spot that we wanted to have someone on from Harbor. So maybe if now was a good time to see if there's someone on the commission that would like to sit down on the steering committee for the study.
Any volunteers?
Where's everyone?
They're asking for volunteers to work on the steering committee.
Correct.
John
If-
is
None here,
chairman
John.
of, John is chairman of
Application review.
application review. I think that would be appropriate if you were on that.
All right. That would be, unless you want to sit down, discuss that with the other commission members.
Well, we can. We'll take it up in our next meeting. When is that ad hoc committee gonna steering committee gonna take place? What's the time frame for that?
I don't think we nailed down a set start date to start meeting up. I think we were trying to see when a good time was in general for everyone, like at the end of the day and stuff. So I think, I'm not sure, Zoe.
Yeah,
if you had-
we're aiming to sort of, our thought was to have our first meeting in November, potentially.
Okay, that gives us time
Yeah.
within,
Yeah, we certainly discussed that, John. That'd be good.
yeah, it'll give us time within the different groups to, would you be looking for a person from each
Commission.
commission that's meeting with us tonight?
No, I think we were looking for somebody from Harbor specifically, and we had invited Steve to participate as well.
Okay, gotcha. So we'll
Yeah,
take it
just
up
to give
at
you
our next meeting is in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, thank you, Steve.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, and it would be about once a month, you know, with, you know, the holiday months would have, you know, potentially the meetings would be canceled to allow for holiday schedules, but
You could be meeting in person, Zoe, or meeting in person or Zoom?
it would be virtual probably.
Virtual meetings? Okay.
After business hours, if at all possible, Michelle, Zoe, that would be appreciated.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're used to our steering committee meetings being sort of structured around the schedules of the participants. So our priority is to hear from you, and we'll figure out what time it needs to be so that we can hear from you.
All right, at this point then, let's move to public comment. Is there anyone from the public that would like to be recognized for 3 minutes?
I don't see anybody on from the attendees side, so
Okay. Having heard none, if there's no other further discussion or questions or interaction, and we'll adjourn this meeting.
And Michelle, I will send you that presentation. All right, it'll be a PDF file. I'll send you.
Okay.
I'll do that this evening.
I think this was great. It's beneficial for all concerned. And thank you for participating.
Absolutely. It was nice meeting you all, and we're looking forward to working together with you.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Good night,
much.
everyone.
Good night.
Good
As
night.
they say in China, buona sera.
everyone.